Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here in one more dialogue of Americas. And the interview today is with the amazing, such an honor to have a person that I admire so much, Rebecca McKinnon, with us. And today she's here actually as the Vice President for Global Advocacy at Wikimedia Foundation, the foundation that really sustains the Wikipedia that we all know and depend so much. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us in the dialogue.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this dialogue and to be speaking with you, a longtime ally and friend and colleague.
Thank you so much. So I think it's pretty hard to not know who you are nowadays, but can you let our viewers know a little bit about you? And you have a very important book in our field, please.
Sure, we'll just not to go on too long about myself, since that's not our purpose, but I've been working in the field of advocating for digital rights, advocating for human rights in the internet context, in the digital context for about 17 years now. Before that, I was a journalist. I was actually CNN's Beijing bureau chief and then Tokyo bureau chief. So I really came to this really having experienced what it's like to be censored and surveilled, and to be working under conditions where you cannot speak and you're threatened, and working with people whose lives are at stake for speaking. And so that's kind of where I came from originally to this work. In the mid-thousands, I co-founded a citizen media network called Global Voices. They've got a very active Spanish language and Latin American community as well. And so that is a network that continues to thrive with citizen journalists and media makers from around the world, with a real emphasis on Global South, on the voices that are less heard in global media. As you mentioned, I wrote a book, Consent of the Networked: The Worldwide Struggle for Internet Freedom. It came out almost 10 years ago, and it was a real response to what was an excessive optimism at the time, if you can even remember people being optimistic about the internet, where a lot of policymakers, journalists, activists were saying, oh, well, all you need is to bring the internet to whatever country, and then you will have democracy and more freedom. You just need more internet, you need more Facebook, you need more Twitter, and everyone will be free and democratic. Well, my book was a response to that, saying not so fast. Actually, if you take the current trends, everything's going to become more authoritarian, not not more democratic, unless companies and governments and really all of us who use the internet take responsibility to ensuring that technology is governed and operated in a manner that supports human rights. Unfortunately, now everyone's quite pessimistic about the internet, and we're failing to hold people accountable in the right ways to govern and operate the internet in a human rights compatible way for the most part around the world. So in any case, I won't go on about other things, but I've just joined the Wikimedia Foundation, where I'm Vice President for Global Advocacy, and our purpose, I lead the advocacy and public policy team, and our purpose is to advocate for policies and technologies globally that enable not just Wikipedia and Wikimedia projects to survive and thrive, but for open knowledge communities to survive and thrive. We want public policy, we want the technology that we all depend on to enable citizens to freely share knowledge.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And actually, so how do you see the role of your job right now and Wikipedia in general to really contribute to discussions like content moderation, which is such a hard discussion? And we see has another topic we are covering at the Dialogue for the Americas, the deterioration of the public debate, right? You literally foreseeing that in your book. So what is your role now in that regard, and what is the role of Wikipedia to contribute to this?
Yeah, Well, I think, content moderation, when people think about content moderation, when policymakers, when journalists, when a lot of people think about what is content moderation, people think about Facebook, people think about YouTube or Twitter or Instagram, and, these big commercial platforms, and, what happens when you post something and it gets taken down because it violated the rules, or somebody is abusing you and the rules don't seem to be enforced against that person. And so I think most people are experiencing content moderation in that context of a small number of large, globally powerful commercial platforms that are centrally run. They're run by CEOs and executives who then hire people to enforce the rules and moderate the content. But the purpose of these platforms is to maximize profit. It's to maximize advertising revenue. It's to maximize engagement on the platform. And of course, there's a, it's certainly it enables people to share and do a lot of things and organize that they couldn't do before the internet. But the priorities of commercial platforms and how their content is moderated is really driven by their commercial imperatives. And so when people think about content moderation, they think about it in that context through that type of experience. But there's actually many other types of content moderation, many other types of online platforms and communities that exist for different purposes. And Wikipedia being a great example of a platform that does not exist to generate advertising revenue or to bring profit to shareholders. It exists to enable people to exercise their right to share knowledge. And it does have rules. The rules, however, it's not like with Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, where the company sets the rules and then they're enforced by employees. What happens is the community sets the rules, and it's set around the fact that with Wikipedia or any of the other projects that the Wikimedia Foundation supports, the volunteers set the rules based on what the purpose of the platform is, but also around some core values, right? And then the volunteers are enforcing the rules. And the rules are different for different types of pages. They can be different in different language and geographical contexts. They're different for public figures or for medical information. The volunteers are setting the rules and how to moderate the content and ensure that the content is based on credible sources, right? You can't just kind of post anything you want on
Yes.
Wikipedia or it will be taken down if it's not citing credible sources. And but the people monitoring the content about, let's say, COVID-19 information, there are medical professionals involved. It's people who are kind of closest to the issue, or people moderating content around particular places. Or particular, things in a particular country. It's people who actually have knowledge of, who are closer to those things, rather than sort of randomly employed employees. But it's quite decentralized, right? But it's meant to maximize the public's ability to share credible, fact-based, well-sourced knowledge.
That's
Clearly with one another.
Sorry, yeah, that's very interesting, because it actually reminds me a little bit of, for example, Global Voices, which is another project you founded, because you are really basing yourself on the local expertise or the expertise coming from the experts. So, but Wikimedia Foundation also has a board that deal with some of those norms. So can you tell a little bit more about how the model of content moderation in Wikimedia works, and perhaps how could inspire platforms?
Yeah, well, the Wikimedia Foundation's board is governing the foundation, which then supports the community's work. And so we're hosting the community's work, and so we facilitate a lot of work that the community has been doing over the past several years in terms of setting objectives, setting community goals, stating community values, which include a lot of goals around maximizing diversity and inclusion, tolerance, et cetera. A lot of values that are very much in line with international human rights norms, right? And there's a universal code of conduct. There's community strategies that are set, and charter. There's a charter, and the community is working to flesh out those things. And the foundation really exists to support the community's work on that, and obviously to guide it. And there are members of the community who are elected to the foundation's board. So there's this complex governance. But the point is that the governance is very much about serving the public interest, right? And serving
exactly the phrasing I had in mind. It serves the public interest.
The public interest, right? It's not serving the shareholders, because there are no shareholders, right? And obviously there are complicated matters related to legal jurisdictions, and so there are governments that are making demands all over the world. You should take this down, or we don't like this. And so we have a legal team that helps supports the community in dealing with government demands of different kinds, dealing with legal actions that get taken by people who don't like what is posted about them on Wikipedia, right? So our foundation exists to support all this. But what can platforms learn? It's hard to say exactly how you take a large commercial platform and decentralize it if your purpose continues to be to maximize profits. So that's a hard problem. I think the commercial platforms have run into some fundamental questions related to their business model, and to what extent is it compatible with the public interest. And in a previous role where I was running a research program called Ranking Digital Rights, we talked about how at some point, when a company, let's say you are a manufacturing company, right? And you're polluting the air and water in order to maximize your profits. At some point, the law has to say, no, you can't, there are certain red lines you cannot cross if you're going to operate as a commercial business. You cannot hire 12-year-olds. You cannot pollute the air and water. And yes, you would make more money if you did those things, but you can't do that because society says that that's not allowed. And so I think part of the problem with the commercial platforms, frankly, and this is something I used to write about in my previous roles, is that there's no kind of lines drawn around at what point are certain business models just too toxic. And I think there's a real question that has not been answered, frankly, around, is it possible, if you modify a targeted advertising business model, if you maybe make half the money, still make money, can you do things that would make your business more responsible, even if it's not as wildly profitable as it is now? And that question has been addressed with other kinds of businesses over history, mining industries, or and we're still struggling with that, right? We struggle every day with corporate abuses, in the Amazon and so on. And how do we get companies to act responsibly? It's not a problem that's ever solved. This question about how do you align doing well commercially with doing good for society And how do we
how
push
much
that,
enough, right?
right?
How much enough is doing well, right? How
Right,
much do we
exactly,
need? Yeah.
right. And so kind of globally and in our economies and our discussions about climate, right? It's all about, how do you have business that is actually sustainable for the human race, right? And so I think that's one of the fundamental issues even with content moderation, right? And to a certain extent, Wikimedia is kind of, it's your sustainable cooperative community rather than a multinational corporation, right? And people are sharing and curating and building open knowledge projects for a public interest purpose. And of course, finding resources to do that and sharing and allocating resources to do that. But it's a different, it's a different thing when you're working in that way. So I guess I think that the key is that we need lots of different types of public interest, open knowledge organizations. Of course, we want the Wikimedia projects, Wikipedia and Wiki Knowledge, Wikidata, Wikimedia Commons, all these different projects, Wiki Travel, et cetera, to support them and to flourish. But it's also important that other open knowledge projects flourish, whether it's the Internet Archive or so many other public library related projects, but also for communities, in any country, across Latin America, across all other parts of the world, to be able to create more localized open knowledge projects and to have policy environments that support that and don't render it impossible.
Well, so many questions. Thank you so much for that. And actually that brings me to one of the other topics we are discussing in the dialogues, which is about digital and media literacy, right? So how do you see Wikimedia Foundation projects or even Wikipedia community projects contributing to this idea of digital media literacy, right? There were so many projects in the early 2000s and you don't see that much out there anymore. So how do you see the community and the foundation contributing to the ecosystem of literacy?
Yeah, well, so I think in quite a number of ways. One is that Wikimedia and the Wikipedia, various Wikipedia contributor communities are working very hard on expanding participation in Wikipedia in various languages, indigenous languages, et cetera, bringing more women into the project, bringing more marginalized communities into the project, and putting a lot of resources into outreach and training. And so just in terms of inclusion, which is a big part of literacy. The other thing is and I've been an educator among the various hats I've worn. And I have to say, when you bring students to Wikipedia and you have them edit Wikipedia articles for the first time, it's a fantastic media literacy tool in terms of figuring out, what is the sourcing? What statements of facts can I make on Wikipedia and not have them removed because they don't have credible sources attached? And even, I've had journalism students who I assigned them to edit Wikipedia, and they're like, oh my goodness, my content got removed because they said my source was bad. Like, well, there you go. And so I think everybody can learn a lot about the nature of information, the nature of statements and facts that they find on the internet, and to engage with other Wikipedia editors about the facts that are being debated and placed on a page and whether they can remain on the page or not. I think it's a fantastic media literacy tool. But it also brings us, I think, to a related question, which is that it helps people understand how important it is to have independent scholarship and independent journalism that make up the primary sources that are being cited on Wikipedia. And on some topics, there is a lot of good scholarly open articles that you can cite, a lot of good journalistic independent reporting. And on other topics in other parts of the world, maybe there's been very little reporting, or maybe the only reporting was from a particular government state-sponsored news agency, or, and then what do you do? Then it becomes much harder to identify good source material. And it gets us all thinking about, how do we support this ecosystem of information in order to really share free knowledge.
Yeah. It makes me think about the word trust, right? How you generate trust in the system. So, and that's a question for you in terms of trust, right? So how the community has dealt with the issues of disinformation and misinformation in Wikipedia. So back to you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I can tell you that medical information on Wikipedia is really very good. And that's because there's a dedicated community of editors, and it's been very prioritized, of course, with the, and the World Health Organization is supporting the work, and there's a lot of attention put on it, obviously. But Wikipedia is pretty much the only place you can go on the internet and get reliable medical information and not be tracked, not have a dossier collected on you about, what you're searching for, which with medical information is a thing. And so again, this issue of trust, it has to be built, it has to be earned. You have to be sufficiently transparent. So with Wikipedia, obviously there are some pages that are better quality than others. And you can go into the tab that shows the entire history of editing of a page. You can see all the debates about whether some sentence should stay or be deleted. What the source was it a good source? You can see all those debates. And that's very important, I think, to building trust. I think that there's a big lack of transparency in when it comes to either whether it's social media platforms or many other media sources about, where did this information come from? How did it get recommended to me? Why is it the first thing I'm seeing? What are the motivations behind that? And the more people understand that, the less likely they are to be manipulated.
No, that's very, very interesting. And I think there are so many lessons there for the whole market. And I think it has one final question, right? So how all that relates to human rights in your perspective, or if you want to talk about civil rights in the US specifically, but human rights, because your community is global, right? So.
Yeah, well, it relates to human rights very directly. I mean, freedom of expression in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a human right, and it's not just freedom to speak; it's freedom to form an opinion without interference. So that speaks very much to disinformation, freedom to access information, right? But of course, there are other rights that have to be balanced, privacy, non-discrimination, just to name a couple others, the right to participate in political processes, et cetera, that all very much interrelate. Economic and social and cultural rights as well. And so, you know, I think the problem we have right now in the policy space is that I think a lot of legislators are seeing that, okay, this, you know, there are things happening on the internet with our citizens' rights are being violated in different ways by bad people on the internet, or being harmed, or children are being harmed, or privacy rights are being harmed, or elections are being manipulated, or disinformation is happening, or whatever, and wanting to fix the problem, right? You know, and I think because technology is new, a lot of policymakers tend, and not just policymakers, you know, a lot of smart people, community leaders, feel that it's possible to fix the problems on the internet like you fix the TV, right? Or like we fix our dishwasher or something, and we can fix the internet and it'll be fixed. But it's kind of like saying, okay, I want to fix, you know, Sao Paulo, or I want to fix Santiago, or I want to fix New York City. What does that mean? Right? It means different things to different people. You know, it does it mean we're going to have rules that eliminate crime and make everybody happy? Well, you could eliminate crime. You would be Pyongyang. We don't want to be Pyongyang. That's not so good for human rights. Right? And so the issue is, if we are going to have governance, which we need, right? So freedom of expression is a right. It doesn't mean you're free to do whatever you want and violate everyone else's rights while you speak, right? It's balanced within other rights. And we have governance in which rules are set and enforced, but the rules have to be compatible with human rights norms, right? And the enforcement, nobody's ever going to be happy either with the rules or how they are enforced. And everybody's going to be arguing as long as we are human. So we're not going to fix the internet any more than we're going to fix any human city or human community. We are constantly going to be debating these issues of security versus freedom. You know, how do you have security and freedom? How you protect everyone's rights while also, you know, if we need rules, you know, as women, we wouldn't be able to go out on the street if there was not law that was enforced, right? But on the other hand, we need law that's enforced, that communities participate in, and that the law is not enabling one set of powerful people to exploit another or oppress another, right? And so how do we do that? It's a constant negotiation process. And so when it comes to whether it's laws that relate to content moderation, or laws that relate to privacy or surveillance, and you know, we're not going to have some perfect solution that is just going to be, the law is going to be passed and that's going to fix the problem. We have to recognize that the law needs to be very carefully negotiated with many stakeholders participating in the process. And it's going to have to be constantly renegotiated and revised in terms of how it's implemented. And we have global networks of people and how those laws are affecting people in many different places. And it's very difficult. And the problems don't get resolved. But the key is we need enough accountability and transparency so that when someone abuses their power over law, or abuses their power over technology, we know that the abuse happened and we can hold the abuser accountable, and the people who suffered the abuse can get redress. And that's the key, really, I think, when it comes to how we govern an online community or how we govern, how we think about internet regulation going forward. And it's difficult.
Yeah, that's the accountability and transparency piece are core issues, right? And UNESCO is now doing all the consultation on transparency, and they are one of the partners of the dialogue. So we are very attentive to that. And to go back to you, what would be your final thoughts, and what do you recommend in terms of some path for the dialogue of the Americas, right? One of the goals here is to really think about an actionable plan, right, of action in the whole region, right? Because it covers the whole hemisphere. So final thoughts, please.
That's a big question.
Yeah, a small question for you.
A big question, and I'm not going to have some brilliant answer for you. Other than that, it's very good that you're doing this. You know, it's I think really important to sort of connect these issues across the Americas, and to identify the interconnections, and I think it'll be very interesting to see how policymaking or technical developments or commercial developments in one part of the Americas is affecting the rest of the continent, and how we can form coalitions and partnerships across this very large variety of nations. With so many different types of things happening, and so many different challenges, but also many common ones, and how we really build on our common humanity, and find ways to build processes and to emphasize technologies that really help us build around what we share. And I know from my work, not only with the Wikipedia community, but the Global Voices community, and working with journalists from around Latin America and North America, we have deep communities that all share common values, whether or not we share the same language, whether or not we share the same socioeconomic, ethnic, linguistic backgrounds. There is a large set of people with common values and common aspirations, and so let's figure out how we can amplify that and get beyond these sort of divisions that are holding us back.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you all who are following our Dialogue for the Americas and all our interviews here. So see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.